think it's still, yeah, it's live streaming. Okay, hey, Facebook world and everybody here. So I'm Nirupam from Blue Water Photo and Travel. For those of you on Facebook that can't see this, I'm basically at our social night in Culver City, California, and I'm going to be giving a presentation about diving in Truk Lagoon, where I just came back from in June. It's my new favorite dive destination. I'm super excited to show everybody some of the photos I captured. So I'm gonna try to live stream everything and we'll see how it goes. Um, oh, interesting. Let's see. Um, Here. Sorry, I just got one thing I gotta fix. I think for Facebook, it's here we go. Okay, cool. All right, so yeah, welcome to Social Night. Thank you guys so much for coming. This presentation is about my new favorite dive destination, Truk Lagoon. It's a pretty amazing place out in the middle of the Pacific. Uh, it is a basically a coral atoll in Micronesia. Micronesia is its own country. It used to be, I think, a U.S. protectorate after World War II. Eventually became its own country, and Chuuk is, I believe, the most populated part of the country, but we're talking about maybe 6,000 people total. It's a very, very small place. It's a very interesting place because it's been really touched by World War II, and it still continues to be that way to this day. And you can really see that. So it's very impactful when you're there. And I think emotionally, it kind of speaks to me more than other dive destinations I've been. You can really see what the war has done, and you can see what it was like. And it's just a good reminder of kind of how easy it is for humanity to create something like this. So hopefully some of the photos I show you will show that. But above water, it is still a nice, pristine, beautiful island, as you can see in this photo. Just a little bit about me for those of you that are on Facebook. When the slide switches, there we go. I'm no longer the trip leader because I'm not on the trip anymore. But my name is Nirupam, and I no longer live in Ocean Shores, Washington, but that's okay. So I live in sometimes Olympia, Washington, sometimes Los Angeles. I run the underwater photography guide and Blue Water Photo. I help out with Blue Water Travel, lead some of our workshops, and we just had our first workshop to Truk in June. Um, how many of you guys have been to Truk Lagoon? Oh, okay. So more than one. Monica was just with me, and she was my roommate in Truk. And it was a fantastic trip. Beautiful reefs, which I wasn't expecting on the ships themselves, and very, very interesting history. So I'll try to convey that as much as I can. I've forgot some of the names of the wrecks since then, so bear with me if I forget some specific details. But overall, it's just a fantastic place to be. Now, one of my specializations is low light photography because I live in Washington and I live in California, and the whole West Coast is pretty low on light. Well, what was interesting about Truk is it's also one of those low light destinations. A lot of the wrecks are a little bit deeper. You're often doing wreck penetration, so the light and the lighting is a little bit different. So this first presentation is going to be about diving in Truk and about the experience that we had. And then the next presentation is going to be about shipwreck photography, which will hopefully tie all that together and you can get an idea of some of the techniques I use to take these photos. Okay, so here's a quick history of Chuuk. It's a large lagoon protected by a barrier reef, so it's an atoll. Basically, what you have is you have this volcano that used to be there because of magma at the ocean floor, rose up, and then it started to sink, and the coral atoll kind of grows around it. Now, the Japanese saw how well protected it is, and when you get there, you really see how well protected it is because it's so flat and it's so calm, because that barrier reef just blocks all the wave action. So Japan decided, well, it wanted to put all of its logistics and merchant ships right in the center of that lagoon, and they protected it with some warships. So the whole Japanese Navy was there. Now, most of the wrecks were near those central islands because that's where people lived. That's where the logistics hubs were. That's where the aircraft were. That's where the fuel tanks were. And the lagoon itself, though, is about 40 miles across. So it's actually fairly big. The Japanese Imperial Navy's Fourth Fleet was situated there. Um, and at the time, America kind of thought that Truk was Japan's Pearl Harbor. It was heavily fortified, but it really wasn't. It was just a logistics hub where they stored a lot of stuff. Um, so in February 17 and 18, 1944, after doing a reconnaissance mission, the US Navy decided that actually Truk was not very well fortified, and it was probably a good idea to do an aerial bombardment. They didn't want to waste any troops on the area. And when Japan saw the reconnaissance mission, because they did see the planes, they started moving their warships out. So they moved all those warships to Palau, and then so we had some battles in Palau afterwards, which is why you see some shipwrecks over there. And the U.S. sent 500 planes on aircraft carriers, and they bombed basically the whole place. And over those 2 days, Japan lost over 250 planes. They lost, a few dozen, maybe 100 ships overall. A couple of battleships, most of them were merchant ships. In a lot of the ship names, you'll see the name Maru. Maru basically means circle in Japanese, and merchant ships will go to a place and come back from that place, and so that's why they're called Marus. So those are merchant ships. Um, and a lot of them wore Marus, which means that they had uh, a lot of cargo. They had a lot of ammunition. They had a lot of tanks. They had planes. So there was a lot of interesting stuff to see inside those ships. But there are a lot of people as well. 4,500 people died in the attack. On the Japanese side, the U.S. lost maybe, I think, about 40 people, maybe I think 20 planes, something like that. So it was definitely an American victory there. But in any of those situations, as you kind of see when you're underwater, none of it's a victory. Um, Now, the wrecks have been there for 8 decades, so they are starting to fall apart a little bit. There's starting to be some collapse of the superstructure, and there's a lot more life. If you look at the old Jacques Cousteau documentaries, you see that they're talking about how, well, there's not too much life, there's not too much fish. It makes sense. The place still smells like petroleum in some areas. So there probably wasn't that much fish at that time, and I think that really affected locals when it came to subsistence living. But since then, life has come back. People are now fishing. I wouldn't want to eat that fish, but when we were coming back from our trip, they call them, I think they're Micronesian suitcases, but basically coolers full of fish that they would trade with the other islands. So they'd bring those back on the planes. So there's definitely a lot of life compared to how it used to be, but also in return, there's less man-made objects. There's more pillaging of the wrecks themselves by divers. Um, so there's less artifacts, and a lot of the structure, like I said, is starting to collapse a little bit. So now is the time to dive there. If you dive there in the next 10, 20 years, that's the time to go and really see it. Um, okay. Let's see. So I talked about Operation Hailstone, which is what it was called. Now, the U.S. destroyed a lot of the fuel depots on the island, which gave the U.S. the advantage in the Battle of Saipan, which kind of put them within air raid distance of Japan. So it allowed for the U.S. to really win World War II by taking Chuuk. So it's a very significant place. There was also a lot of war crimes done in Chuuk that people don't realize. A lot of the local people really suffered. They were enslaved. And during the war, a lot of them, there were medical experiments on a lot of people there. So the war crimes that Japan was actually prosecuted for, a lot of that happened there. And it's kind of, something to think about when you are there. It's just a really like a significant place, and people are still affected. There's not as much agriculture as there could be because of all the bombing. And until recently, a lot of the island was supported by USAID, by US aid. So, but yeah, that is my overview of the area. Now, um, when you're taking photos there, there's a few things you want to think about, right? When you're taking a photo and trying to convey that whole story. And it depends on what your story is. It could be a story about, you know, rebirth of all the natural environment there. It could be a story about the past and history. So I always try to think about, okay, how can I take a photo of the complete wreck just to show this is the wreck, this is what it looks like. Then I'll try to find like some kind of artifact that's significant to that wreck or to that story. And then I'll try to show how the wreck becomes habitat and finally the human element. So when you're looking through these photos, you want to start thinking about that and seeing that. This photo right here is the mast of, might be the Shinkoku Maru or one of them. And the masts are really overgrown with life. It's pretty amazing. And this is some of that soft coral I was talking about, how it looks very reminiscent of Fiji in some ways. Unless, Mark, maybe you don't think so. I don't know. But now these are a few of Chuuk's top wrecks. And I say Truk and Chuuk interchangeably. Chuuk is actually the modern name for it. It used to be called Truk Lagoon by divers. So I'll show some photos of each of these wrecks, but basically there's the Fujikawa Maru, which is famous for R2D2, the air compressor. It looks like R2D2. It's really cool. I'll show you guys a photo of that. The Nipa Maru, which has some tanks, lots of ammunitions, and the gas masks are the highlight there. The Shinkoku Maru, which is just incredible life, and I'll show you guys that. The Hoki Maru, which is trucks and the cargo hold, and the Betty Bomber, which we didn't do, but it's a intact Japanese bomber. So I will move on to my photos so that you guys can see what that looks like. Now, before I do, I'm also going to share um, just how it is on Google Maps. So Truk Lagoon, just so you guys can see where this is. I'm going to share again on Zoom. Okay. All right. And I'll talk a little bit about how to get there. It's not easy. I'll just say that right out. This is one of the harder trips that I've taken. So Truk is right up here above Papua New Guinea. And, you know, I was coming in from Seattle. Usually, you know, if you're going to Truk, you're probably flying United, which is not everybody's favorite airline. Oh, you can't see anything. Oh, interesting. Why is that? Um, okay, that's odd. Okay, now you should be able to see everything. Okay. Um, okay, cool. So this is a map of the Earth now. Let me, let me go down to Truk. So this is Truk right here. So it is right above Papua New Guinea, right over here. So you can actually, it's kind of interesting because during World War II, you can see where the battles progressed. So when the warships left, they actually went left over here to where Palau is. And Guam is right around here. So when you're getting there, you end up usually taking United. And there's two places that you can kind of enter Chuuk from. You can enter from Guam, or you can enter from Honolulu. And either direction that you go, you're going to be taking a plane called the Island Hopper. It's a very unique experience. It's definitely like a once in a lifetime thing to do. And it's probably something you want to do once in a lifetime. So it is a plane that hops between 5 or 6 different islands, depending on which way you're going. So most people have a more comfortable time, but it takes longer going through Guam. When you do that, you typically will fly, if you're from the West Coast, you'll typically fly into Japan, and then from Japan to Guam, and then Guam to Chuuk. And that's a little bit more comfortable of a trip. You can kind of stop in Guam, you can go to the beach. Micronesia doesn't have great beaches, so that's kind of the place to go. Um, but if you're willing to go on an adventure, you can go through Honolulu. And so when I did that, my initial ticket was Seattle to San Francisco, San Francisco to Honolulu, Honolulu to Majuro, which is Marshall Islands, so actually a different country. Then Majuro to Kwajalein, which is another military base on the Marshall Islands, Kwajalein to Kosrae, Kosrae to Ponape, and then Ponape to Chuuk. So that is the route to get to Chuuk. And it's about, once you get to Honolulu, it's about 12 to 13 hours on that plane. And you can get on and off, which I kind of recommend because you can see a little bit of each island. So I got off and got some jewelry and got some snacks. And you want to bring some snacks with you as well as some water because they don't serve all that much stuff on the trip. And just be prepared for a lot of up and down. Now each flight is about an hour, and then there's about an hour once you get there. So it just it adds up throughout the day, and it's a long day. I definitely had a migraine at the end of it, and I was ready to go to bed. So that's what we did. A lot of people feel like, because you do usually get there at a time where you could dive that day. I would just plan on not diving that day because most likely you won't want to, and there's plenty of time to dive. Now let's see here. I'm gonna switch over to my photos now so you can see it. Um, we went on a boat called the Odyssey, and let me go over here. And the Odyssey is an excellent dive operation. Let me see if I can. I'm gonna just. Oh, okay. I'm gonna just try to get all the zoom stuff out of here. Is this all right? I don't know. Let me. Oh, hide floating meeting controls. Perfect. Okay. So we are on a boat called the Odyssey, and the Odyssey is an excellent, excellent dive operation. They really know their stuff. Each one of the dive masters is a tech instructor. They all, I think almost all of them or all of them knew how to use rebreathers, and they're using rebreathers. They bring extra gas for you, extra tanks. They'll stage bottles where they need to be. So you're in good hands. Every dive kind of felt like a Discover scuba dive, but like more of a Discover tech wreck diving sort of. So uh, it feels actually very safe when you do it. I know I was concerned, and a lot of people get concerned about the depth, about um, you know, the just being in a wreck and penetrating shipwrecks. But once you're there, because it's in a lagoon, it's some of the calmest diving that I've ever done. There's really no currents. It's warm water, 80 to 86 degrees. Um, it's a little bit murkier because of all the silt in there, and especially during the calm season when we were there, the visibility was could range anywhere from 30 feet to I would say 60 or 70, but averaged about 40 to 60. Um, and when you're in the wrecks, it can go down to zero. So you just have to be, you know, wary of your fin kicking and wary of how much sediment you're kicking up. I did very minimal editing in these photos. I haven't been home yet to really get my big screen computer and edit as much as I want to. So you'll see some of the silt, and I think that's a good thing because it shows you what that real environment's like. So this is the first wreck that we did. Uh, and this is Craig, who's on a rebreather, and it was just kind of in the engine room. Now, one of the themes when you're doing these wreck penetrations is that you always want to see some sort of light, and if you don't, you want to have some kind of line or a guide with you when you're inside of a wreck, kind of like cave diving. But when it comes to photography, a lot of that is going to be about where's that natural light and ambient light, which I'll talk about later. So here is, I've got a lot of photos, so I'll kind of go through them pretty quickly. Now, on each one of these shipwrecks, something that divers do that I think normally I wouldn't be that happy about because a lot of the photos feel staged, but divers will actually take artifacts and they'll put them at the top of the wreck for everybody to be able to see that. And I think that's a pretty cool thing. They're kind of like these museums at the top of each wreck, and you can see everything, but they're not taking it off the wreck and they're not taking it out of the water. And for me, that's fine. So there are lots and lots of sake bottles on the wrecks, and you can see that here. And each one of these artifacts is just a reminder of the person who's holding that bottle or who was living with that artifact. This is a lantern that was on the top of the first wreck that we did, which I think was the Kiyosumi. And the dive guide actually put a light inside of the lantern. So in some ways, I really wanted to use light to bring the viewer of the image back in time to when that artifact was functioning. So in this case, we put a light inside of the lantern, and it kind of looks like how a lantern used to be. It's a very cool look. This right here is the Japanese symbol for peace, which is kind of an, I don't know, a bit of an oxymoron, sort of down there. It is a warship, and it was sunk in a battle, but that's the Japanese symbol for peace. So I thought that was a very interesting photo, and it's on the Hien Maru, I think, which is what that is. That's the letters there. So this wreck was kind of neat because the letters of the actual name of the ship were still visible, and it was just covered in fusiliers, soft coral, and life. Um, a lot of the fish, they kind of like to hang out at where, if there is some water movement, where that water movement is, or at the tip of the wreck, at the corners. And the fusiliers were just amazing during that. So this is the Odyssey. It's a famous boat for the fact that it has a dive ladder, which is pretty cool. So it's very easy to get on and off the boat. Now, a lot of these guys that are doing rebreathers, they have their rebreathers, they've got bailout bottles, they've got deco gases. So, and sometimes they have cameras and scooters. When you add up all that gear, it can be 200 pounds to 300 pounds of dive gear. So having that ladder is essential for them. With photographers, we like to complain about how much gear we have. It's not really that much. It's a 30-pound camera, but it's still nice to have that ladder for sure. Um, and because the water's so calm, it's really easy to do these split shots. So that was kind of fun going on the back of the boat. You can see that volcanic part of the island right in the middle. Obviously, it's a distinct volcano now, and the coral atoll is around it. These, ooh, I wish I remembered. Do you remember what these were? Like torpedoes, I think. Yeah, so in the hold of each ship, you see really interesting artifacts like these torpedoes. This was in the engine room where you see those knobs, and I actually took a light, Blue Water 3000 video light, and I put it behind the knobs in the engine room and created that effect. This was a canteen. To me, that was a pretty impactful photo just because you can really imagine that somebody had that on them when the ship sunk. And it was deep in the hold. I mean, it was deep in there. You kind of knew they didn't survive when you saw that. And had a little bit of light in the back. So you could see where that light was coming in from. This was maybe 100, 110 feet deep. So this was an electrical panel in one of the engine rooms. I thought this was kind of interesting. This was near where the canteen was. The electrical panel just looks like an electrical panel today. It's not that different. And so it just reminded me of how close that whole battle and that whole war was to now. This is on a submarine tender. Now, a submarine tender is a vessel that is used to supply submarines throughout the war. And so they actually sunk the supply vessel for the submarines. So what these are right here are periscopes. A little bit zoomed in. These are periscopes, and they're inside of this like channel inside of this room or galley where you had these rays of light going through from the surface. These are some of the plates inside next to the periscopes. And this is the propeller on the largest wreck in Truk Lagoon. Forgot the name of the wreck. I don't remember if it was Hien Maru or it was one of the Marus. But I thought it was a really neat look to just see how big that propeller is next to a diver. I mean, it's just incredible how big some of these ships are. Now, this is in one of the engine rooms of the ship. It's a famous engine room. And I took this photo just using ambient light. So this is just a diver going through with a light here. And the light was coming from the surface and it was lighting up that catwalk in the middle. And it's amazing because I mean you can see how big some of these engine rooms are, and you're going through it and it's completely preserved. Now this was I think it's called the P, what was it, 39 or 169, I think maybe, submarine. So this one had a pretty interesting history. The submarine actually when they were trying to avoid the bombs, they tried really hard to go down quickly. And when they did that, they left a hatch open. And so half the submarine filled with water, and the other half of the submarine was full of about 80 crew. And they spent 2 days at the bottom knocking on the wall of the submarine, trying to get help. The Japanese took some wires and they tried to pull them up, and they weren't successful. So eventually the knocking stopped. There was no way to get oxygen in there, and they all died. So this is at the bottom at about 130 feet, and you can see all the wiring around that submarine, and you can see the remnants from that. And this is the propeller on the submarine right here. So this submarine is just wrapped in wires. And then this, I believe, might be the Shinkoku Maru. I'm not sure. But some of these wrecks are just completely covered in life, and that's kind of what these next photos are going to be about. I think this is on the Shinkoku Maru. So a lot of these wrecks have these telegraphs, and telegraphs are interesting because they're used by sailors to basically communicate, full speed ahead. They'll say full speed ahead or like different, commands. So that's the telegraph on one of the ships. Oh, this is Monica, I think. I think it is.
That looks like me.
Yeah, I think so. With some soft coral on the Shinkoku Maru. This was Bill and Mulata also on the Shinkoku Maru with some soft coral. The soft corals there are just beautiful. You can see on the mast how colorful it is and how much fish there is too. I mean, the life is just yeah, just amazing. I mean, it's so much life in every one of these photos. So this was my favorite wreck of the trip was the Shinkoku Maru. It was just this massive wreck covered in life, like this. That's one of the stairways up here. I actually put a remote strobe behind it so that you could see clearly like the stairs as you're looking at it. This is one of the telegraphs as well. And there's some more of the life. Uh, this is one of the only like big animals that you might see. There were a few reef sharks, but there was a turtle, I think once or twice, on the wrecks, and this one got a little bit closer, so that was nice. But you can see just how dark it is, and this is towards the end of the day. It's still a lot of color and a lot of life. Now, I believe this is on the Hokimaru. The Hokimaru is a deeper wreck. This was in a cargo hold about 130, 140 feet down. And on this wreck, it's famous for the trucks of Truk Lagoon. There's a bunch of trucks, tractors inside of the hold. It's very, very silty. So within a second, this was completely silted up. But this was in the first couple seconds that I took the photo.
Yes.
So it's pretty clear at that point, and you can see that deep, dark, kind of mysterious water coming into the hold and the light from the outside. It's deep. It's pretty deep, and it's interesting. Now you can start to see it get silted up. This is one of the cars, and it's really cool to see that these cars from the 1940s. Now it's really starting to be silted. And you still have those old style headlights, and it's really cool.
Were you diving this as a tech diver or a recreational diver?
As a recreational diver. So, you know, there are dives where you could end up doing deco or you do end up doing deco. And when they do that, they'll bring extra tanks and and they have constant gas um, at the 15-foot mark. They have a hang bar. Now it's kind of up to you on what risk you're willing to take. If you're doing a deco dive, I don't think insurance covers that. Depending on what dive insurance you have. So you can definitely do the whole trip as a recreational diver. And there were a lot of people that didn't go into that hole and didn't do that. And that's, I think, a totally valid way to do it. And you can still have an amazing trip. There's just a couple of things like those trucks and the tanks on the San Francisco Maru, which is definitely a tech dive. That if you did want to do that, the crew of the Odyssey will help you out in trying to figure out how to do that. That's what I mean. It's kind of like a Discover Tech Rec situation where you're with a tech instructor and they are helping you through that process and with extra bottles and stuff. But, this is an engine for a Japanese Zero, I think. And I was hoping to see more planes, but it was very silty. So I have a few fuselages. These are depth charges. So this is what they would throw down to try to get submarines. And then on top of the depth charges, there's a lot of bottles and some other, I think, batteries. This is one of the masts. and that's the hang bar. So if you are doing deco, you can do it there, and there's a hang bar. If you're low on air, there, as I think this guy is right here, it's probably Dan. They have a hose coming down, and then so it's unlimited air. You can stay there as long as you want. Um, Now, uh, usually if it is a deeper dive and like they'll encourage you to either dive doubles, side mount, or like or they'll bring some extra bottles. It's kind of uh here's some more of the life coral groupers, life on the mast, some more coral. And this one I kind of like. So this is the Fujikawa Maru. And I actually took a strobe and I put it down the barrel of the bow gun. And I made it fire after 82 years of being underwater. So that was kind of the concept there. Um, I thought it was kind of an interesting shot. This is the cockpit of a Japanese Zero in a very silty cargo hold. And it was so silty that I decided to take a video light and put it in the fuselage of the plane. So that's the fuselage of the Japanese Zero. Now, this is the famous R2D2 on the Fujikara Maru. It's not as easy of a shot as you would think it is. This air compressor is like tucked in a corner, and you have to shove yourself in that corner inside of a machine shop, inside of a ship, 60, 70 feet in the water, to try to get this photo. And you should only have about two people at a time in that machine shop. It's very crowded. We had five because we weren't listening. And it was very tough to get out of that machine shop with five of us stuck in there. But we all managed to get the shot. It was just, I basically took my camera and I just put it down at the bottom. This is the machine shop. Like these are all the tools, and I took this photo because I thought it was so interesting how well organized it was, and how it was well organized by a sailor that was on that ship in 1944, and it hasn't really changed since. Now this is one of the telegraphs, and this is a cool photo because the dive master here, who's modeling for me, he's Japanese, and his hometown is right here. So that was just a kind of a fun factor in the trip. In his hometown, they made a lot of these telegraphs, and they still do. So, and here he is modeling. I tried to set up some remote lighting, so that can kind of help when you have complex structures. So you've got like the ribs of the ship, and having the lights come from different angles makes it look a little bit spooky. So we were playing around with that. In this one, I kind of wanted to make it look like the ship was being bombed, as that's how they all went down. So I set up a remote strobe on the bow of the ship to kind of make it look like that was where it hit. You can see the bow gun right there. That's the same bow gun from before. So this is one without any strobe light. So I actually had a foreground strobe that I set up to try to get the colors there, and then this is without the strobe light, so you can see that it's just the remote strobe and no other light. And a diver right here. So he was actually posing for me, but it's pretty far off. You can see how big these ships are though with that diver. Oh, there's Monica. I just threw it in there because I thought it was a cool shot. Uh, and it's just amazing to see just how expansive some of these ships are. This is on the Nipa Maru, which is famous for the gas masks. So you can see all the gas masks down here. And this is the engine room of the Nipa Maru. So I set up a remote strobe behind the, I don't know if that's the wheel or not, but these are some like gauges for the ship. And you can see all the light coming out of the windows for the engine room. Some life on the mast. And I forgot which wreck this was, but it was famous for having these pillars that they said looked like kelp forest, and I didn't think so, but it was still cool to get some interesting remote lighting images. These are shells for a really big gun. Which one I forgot, but it's pretty big.
Sister ship for the automotive.
Which one?
Those are the 18-inch shells.
Yeah.
What's on the MIS?
Oh yeah, no, you're right. I can't remember what the name was.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think these were being transported, right? I don't know if they were. Yeah, for the gun there. Yeah. Um, and this is on the San Francisco Maru. This is the bow gun there. I set up some remote lighting just to kind of make it look a little bit spookier. And this teapot was on the San Francisco Maru as well. So I thought it was an interesting like contrast, the how delicate the teapot is versus the ship itself. And then one of the tanks on the San Francisco Maru, I tried to get a remote light just to get through the were they the trucks of the tank, so that you could kind of see the outline of it and see the wheel. And this was another remote lighting angle. Just trying to get a different angle on the on this. This is a battle tank, so 3 people fit in there, and it was supposed to go with infantry. So this wasn't like a long range tank by any means. It was a smaller tank. Now, just kind of finishing off the photos of the island itself, you can kind of see what it's like. I stayed at the Truck Stop Hotel, which is kind of a fun place for a couple days. They had this beautiful mangrove. And this is kind of what the town looks like and the island. Island at sunset. And there's still, to this day, it's still a pretty big logistical hub. So there's a lot of shipping. And that's the Micronesian flag. And that was our group. And I think those are all the photos from our last trip, but that's essentially my overview of Truk Lagoon. Any questions? Yeah.
You ever find the Kobayashi?
Kobayashi Maru. I don't think what was the significant about that ship?
Anybody know, remember? Kobayashi
Star
Maru?
Trek.
Star Trek.
Star Trek?
Yeah.
Oh, is that the name of the ship? Oh. Sorry, I don't watch Star Trek, but yeah, unfortunately, I don't think I did. Um, any other questions?
So how are you I mean, you're using remote lights on some of this.
Yeah.
What's the best way to light up these dark wrecks then?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if we look at these photos, like if I'm just using normal strobes, most of these strobes will do a pretty decent job of lighting up the inside of a wreck like this. Like you can get even lighting. Even if you have one strobe, you might get like that halo look like you saw with the 18-inch shells. I mean not halo, like spotlight look, but it'll be pretty decent. So what I try to do, I'll go to the beginning where we had that canteen. I'll try to get some ambient light behind it, and that way it looks pretty even. If you can find a hole where there is ambient light, so if it's a porthole or a crack like this, that's usually the best kind of photos you can take if you're not going to use remote lighting. And then with remote lighting, whether it's a video light like this or an actual strobe, um, like this over here where I actually have a strobe, I usually use that just to accentuate the subject itself. So I don't really use it to light up additional areas because I think most strobes, you typically want to be close anyway. You're going to have a wide angle lens. Most strobes will light up the area that you want to light up. So the remote lighting is more, you want to find something that you can put it behind. And that will often make it look as good as it can be. So like these are video lights from some other divers there, so it's being blocked a little bit by this truck. And let's see. Same with here, the fuselage. You're kind of using the structure of the fuselage for interesting lighting. And here, you can see it's kind of just creating a little bit of a halo effect. You don't need to do a trip to Chuuk and have remote lights. Like it's not a necessary thing. And if you're going to do remote lighting, I would start with video lights. It's a lot easier. And often it's all you need. I think I was playing around with strobes more because I was testing a new system that Miralex created, and it worked okay. But it is pretty bright. Like strobes tend to be a lot brighter. They're not as soft as video lights. A little bit harder to control. Like if you look at the photo here on the inside of the engine room that I was showing, let me see. You can see how much softer this is. This is video lights. So it's not quite as harsh as a strobe light. It's a little bit easier to control. And that is paired well with ambient light. Now, when you are taking photos, ambient light and strobe light is treated very differently. So the nice thing that when you're taking an ambient light photo, your settings are going to be exactly what you want, right? It's going to be taking like a normal photo above water. So you'll know what you're getting before you take that photo. as long as your exposure simulation is turned on and your live view display is turned on, right? You typically, if you're doing strobe photography, you want to turn that off. But if it's turned on, then you can see, oh, okay, my shutter speed is making this darker or it's making it lighter. And so you can see where you want to be. With strobe photos, you're kind of guessing, even with the remote lighting. Does that make sense? It's a little bit, and my next presentation is about that. So I can go into that a little bit. I ran a little long with this one, but if you guys are up for it, I could talk a little bit about the photography aspect.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
What's the code for the restroom? 243.
243. Yeah.
Women's as well.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So let me talk a little bit about the photography aspect. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing here. And let me pull up my presentation. Okay. Okay. So this will be a nice segue. I can go through this, relatively quickly, so you're not here till 9 p.m. unless you want to be. Okay, let's see if this works. Excellent. All right. So this is the art of shipwreck photography. So I'll talk a little bit about that lighting and like how I actually take these shots, and you'll see a lot of these shots in here. So this is a shipwreck in Mauritius. This is my favorite dive in Mauritius. It's called the Jabetus shipwreck. And to me, it's got the best ornament I've ever seen on a shipwreck's bow, which is just a nice piece of coral right there. So I always thought that was kind of cool. The text is blocking the mast that you can see behind it. Now, with shipwrecks, you're photographing history, right? They're a window into another time. So you want to think about, recognizable structures that have historical significance or modern significance, depending on what we're talking about here. The next photo I'm going to show you is more of a modern photo. But the strongest photos communicate scale, history, decay, and the transformation to habitat, right? So here's a photo that is more of a modern look at ghost nets. So these are nets that can still be, like, for some reason, they're in the ocean, they're basically litter, and they're still fishing. So I was on a trip trying to remove these nets, and you can kind of see how it interacts with the fish and how that fish is getting awfully close to being caught again. So you can tell stories about modern issues with shipwrecks as well, because at the end of the day, they are just trash. So now, anytime you're doing shipwreck photography, it's all about safety and dive planning. So wreck photography doesn't have to be wreck penetration. So dive your training, like you can do a whole trip to Chuuk and stay on the outside of the wrecks, and people do that. But you'll want to plan your shots at the surface. You want to find out what are the artifacts there and how deep are they and where are they in the ship. If they're way inside the ship, you're not going to have ambient light. If they're close to the edge, they might have some ambient light. So you got to be thinking about that too. Cameras themselves are an entanglement hazard. So try to keep everything really streamlined. Don't have cables dangling everywhere. And yeah, you also want to practice sharing air with your camera and know how to do that inside of a wreck, right? Because that's going to be the biggest thing with any wreck penetration. You want to be able to know how to share air and how to do that with that camera that you're holding. But buoyancy is everything. So frog kicking is the key to getting these shots. Like there are shots that I didn't get in Chuuk because we weren't all frog kicking, right? And so that really helps not stir up the sediment and the silt in the water. Cool. So study a map or a diagram of the shipwreck. Kind of know what direction the ship came down, know what direction it's situated, and that can go a long way in your photography because you can really plan for that. So you also want to ask a local, like, where is the current direction? What's the where can I find the best viz? Some wrecks are actually worse in other parts of the wreck than others. Here's a good example. I went to the wreck of the Midnight Hour in Catalina, and I didn't know that the wreck was on its side. So I wasn't thinking about the fact that when I took a photo of the bow, just looked like a blob, right? If I had swam a little bit to the left, I probably could have gotten the whole ship and it would have been a really nice shot. So you want to think about that as well. Like, how is this wreck oriented? I was at 120 feet there and pretty narked. So, or maybe 110, something like that. So, that it is what it is, but it would have been better if I had done the research. Now with shipwreck photography, I like to have the widest lens possible. So if you have a fisheye lens or you have a wet lens that has a wider field of view, use that lens. Rectilinear wide lenses are nice for artifacts and they produce straight lines, but they're usually not wide enough to really tell the whole story, at least with my style of photography. There were only about 2 shots in that whole series that I showed that had a rectilinear wide lens. Now, you want to orient the distortion if you are going to use a fisheye lens so that it benefits the scene. So in this case, I got really close to this propeller so that I could kind of make it look really big. And I used a diver in the back as a secondary subject to create scale. So you see how small that diver is compared to that propeller. It makes the propeller look huge. Now, let's see. Oh, choosing the right lighting. Sorry, I read that wrong. Okay, so one strobe can be great for highlighting a single point of interest. So you don't necessarily need 2 strobes when you're doing shipwreck photography. 2 strobes can produce even lighting by eliminating that spotlight effect, but it can also be difficult to light these complex shapes inside the shipwreck. So it's something to think about. Now, shutter speed does not affect strobe exposure. So you want to try lowering your shutter speed if you're facing ambient light and increasing your shutter speed if you don't have ambient light. If you increase your shutter speed, your shots are going to be really sharp. But if you're going to be trying to get ambient light in there, a lower shutter speed will allow you to get more blues coming into the shipwreck. All right, wreck composition. So wreck subjects are complicated, so you want to look for simplicity. You want to find a primary subject, a secondary subject, which could be a diver or a porthole. And you want to try to find negative space. You want to try to find that blue. You want to have your subjects also have enough room for movement. So if you look at this tank right here, I let there be a little bit of space in front of the tank. I wish there was more, to be honest. But then it makes it look like the tank can just roll out of there, right? If I had clipped it and instead had a lot of space over here and cut the photo right here, it would have made it like you want that tank to be able to move and you wouldn't be able to see that there. So make sure there's enough area for it to move. So here's a good subject on a wreck. Now you can see I'm doing a few things here. I have leading lines. In shipwrecks, leading lines are very common because you can like follow that line to a point of interest. That's called a leading line. So you want to look for that. And that's really easy to do with like these bars, right? So you've got your subject here kind of poking through and you've got that guy. This is a good example of like a subject living with the wreck and nature taking over. So that's another thing you want to think about for composition. Same thing with the leading line over here. And there's a little bit of framing. So a lot of wrecks having portholes or ropes, it makes it really easy to frame. Now this is one of the shots that I showed before. But if you get up towards the bow, try to have yourself be over the bow a little bit so that you can see the shape of the wreck itself in the image. And then, use subjects in coral and life to your advantage. I thought it was kind of cool to have this secondary diver here. And the diver has a light, so that kind of makes things look a little bit dramatic. And you can see in this photo, it's the photo's about how the life is kind of taking over the wreck itself. And then if you're inside the shipwreck, this is what I'm talking about when I say the ambient light. If you point your camera towards the ambient light, you can get really dramatic images. And when you're doing that, you want to be treating it like the ambient light should be properly exposed. So you're not going to have that much of it. You're going to want to lower your shutter speed, open up your aperture, increase your ISO. Then you fill in the rest with your strobes. This photo looks good with or without the backlighting. Now, if you want the backlighting, you could just place the video light there and get that kind of look. And then using a diver always helps create perspective, right? Like you can see just how large that wreck is with a diver in between. And same with over here. But this is an example of how you can use that backlighting to create that framing there. And sometimes it's about the artifacts and trying to make that juxtaposition between something intact and not intact. So lighting shipwreck. So you want to take ambient light photo first. Just look at the water and see how does this subject look in the water before you start thinking about that strobe light or that video light. So I fill in the rest of my strobes after I do that. And you want to get close if you're going to use strobes. You can get a lot farther with ambient light. So in this photo, I'm able to get a lot farther away and make it look really dramatic because I'm just using ambient light. And some photographers like to change those photos and make them look black and white to create that contrast a little bit. But I feel like that's cheating. Now, you want to think about shadows with these complex structures. So you can see that my strobe, where's my strobe coming from in this photo?
The top.
Yeah, at the top right here, because the shadow's over here. So you do want to think about shadows. I don't think I lit this well or took a good photo. This isn't a good photo. It's just to show that the shadows can really interfere. And same with this. I don't think this is a great photo. So it's actually a photo of a wheel. But where was my strobe this time? It was just coming straight down into it, which means that there's no shadow. And because there's no shadow, there's no way to see what this is a photo of. So you want to think about that. So I probably should have had my strobes to the left or the right. Now this one's kind of a cool one because this is a mix of video light and strobe light. So I had one strobe over here in the center, and then I had a video light from another diver lighting up the rest of the subject. So sometimes you don't get that full coverage, and sometimes even with two strobes you don't get that full coverage. So it can be nice and helpful to have a diver light things up with their light. And it's a different color. You can see how much warmer that light is.
Is that a good year time?
That's a good question. Probably not, considering it's from Japan. And then when you're on the outside of the wreck, it's normal photography, right? So that's something to think about. This is just normal photography. You're just lighting up a wide angle scene when you're on the outside, and that porthole becomes dark. There's no blue ambient light going through. So here's an example on the left here. It's just normal photography like you're doing on any other dive versus over here. Now you can kind of use video lights from another diver, which that was, and then a strobe over here. You want to start thinking about silt as well. So often, if it's really silty, I'll turn off my other strobe and I'll just use one strobe just to try to reduce the amount of backscattering light coverage. So divers and remote lighting. So divers, it can be, they can add a lot to a scene, but it's really helpful to have them have a light themselves. And when they have a light, tell them to point it at the subject and not into your camera. Because if it goes into your camera, it just like turns into this gaping hole in your photo. And it can be a lot more dramatic if they're pointed otherwise. So you can see this diver had maybe a strobe or a light. It was pointed straight into the camera, not that interesting. Now, when you're working with a model, try to get below them if you can, which is very hard inside of an engine room or something like that. But what I usually do if I'm going inside of a wreck or if I'm going on the outside of a wreck, first thing I do is get lower than the divers. So I can try to get that look and I can separate them from the wreck and put them in the negative space. Now, a lower shutter speed will make a video light brighter. So I always try to lower my shutter speed if I'm going to do backlighting or remote lighting with video lights. But with strobe photography, it doesn't matter. A strobe will fire at any point during a shutter, which means that it's going to be equally bright whether you have a high shutter speed or low shutter speed. So that's kind of a trick for any kind of underwater photography. It's always helpful to agree on hand signals beforehand, as my wife knows. So this is an example with that remote lighting. You can set up a couple of lights at different angles to create shadows. That'll really bring out the structure. And again, that diver has a light, which makes it more dramatic. It helps to have that third tertiary subject of a fish. And then this one's kind of interesting. I didn't talk about this aspect of the photo, but if you point towards the sun, you can start to get those sun rays coming down. In the actual photo, it's a lot more detailed than on the TV. So you can see sun rays And you can see the strobe light. So you've got two types of light, ambient light and artificial light, and you can see where they interact. So this is all ambient light right here. You've got this kind of structure and it looks really blue. And then you've got the color in the middle. That looks really nice. And then this shows two different types of remote lighting. So this is with a video light, where if I lower my shutter speed, I'll get more light in there from the video light. With this photo right here, if I lower my shutter speed, the strobe is going to look exactly the same because this is a strobe. And they're slightly different. You can see a video light's a bit hazier, it's a bit softer. The strobe is definitely a lot punchier, which is a little bit difficult to control. So when you're starting with remote lighting, I recommend that video light. And this is where, you can keep that strobe or the remote light in your photo and it'll still look kind of interesting. You can actually see it just sitting right there. Versus here, I put it slightly out of the frame and I use that remote light to bring out the shadows of the subject. And this is where a diver's video lights can really help just add to the drama. So when the visibility gets low and it starts to get bad, first thing you want to do, increase your ISO and open your aperture. So that's what I was talking about before, right? If the ambient light is low, open your aperture, increase your ISO. Lower your strobe power, and then try to get close. That helps a lot to eliminate the backscatter. Now, it can help also look for like smaller scenes so that you're not lighting a larger area. And then you want to try to shoot up as much as you can, even if you're inside of the ship. You want to like look for where that light is and shoot up into it. And frog kick. Here's an example where the visibility got so low, this is probably like 2 feet of visibility, that I just could not take a photo with a strobe without just getting backscatter everywhere. So instead, what I did is I took a video light. It was actually not that powerful a video light, but again, it's so dark. And I put it in there. And when I put the video light in there, I was able to get that fuselage to really light up that way. Now here's a couple quick settings for shipwrecks. If you want to take a picture, you can. This will help you later on. It's very different on the inside of the wreck or the outside. Inside of the wreck, you start to lower your shutter speed. You have a higher ISO. Some of these shots, I shot at 3200 for the ISO. It's pretty high. And then if you're on the outside, then it's going to be a lower ISO, higher shutter speed, right? Now the strobe power, it varies. Inside of the wreck, you're going to have a lower strobe power, and then on the outside, you typically have a higher one. But what makes a strong wreck photo? This is the last slide. It's that the subject is immediately understandable, which is a hard thing to do. The image has a clear focal point. There's diagonal lines where the shipwreck feels three-dimensional, which is the case here. It's kind of a diagonal line. It looks three-dimensional. There's a strong secondary or tertiary subject. To me, this is an okay photo because there's no secondary subject. It's just a wreck. And the photograph communicates scale or history or tells some kind of story. So technical perfection is not important for shipwreck photography. You can have that backscatter in there. You can have the muck in there. That's fine. The important thing is that it tells the story, right? And there's a lot of stories to be told when it comes to a wreckage. So that is my presentation. Somehow I was able to do that in 16 minutes. So. Any questions?
Were the gas masks also placed by other divers up on top?
Yes, they were. Yeah, and they were so delicate that if you touched them, they would disintegrate. Yeah, after all that time.
You able to settings?
Yes, of course. Yep. Yes.
You kind of take a picture with that remote strobe. How do you know where to put it?
With the remote strobe. So it's a good question. There's two directions a remote strobe can go, and I know this sounds obvious, but it can go to you or away from you. And when it's going to you, you typically don't want this like white splotch going straight at you. So if you're pointing the strobe to you, then you want something blocking the strobe. But if you want the light to look a little bit more dramatic, like it's lighting up a larger area, then you want it pointed away towards the subject. So let me we go back to that. So here's an example. Okay. So this one is kind of in between, but mostly this strobe is pointed at me. So I put the subject in front of the strobe, and I did that on purpose because I really wanted to show the outline and the contrast of the subject. Otherwise, it just looks like a blob, right? So that's why you have that remote lighting pointed to you. Now, if it's pointed away from you, let me get to that point. Again, this is to me, something's in front of it. To me, something's in front of it. Okay, if it's pointed away from me, then it's to, oh, almost there. And this is towards me, towards me, towards me. Most of the time it's towards me. If it's pointed away from me, it's to light up the subject to make it a little more dramatic, to give it that like studio effect or that stage effect. So this kind of looks like stage lighting, right? It's a lot brighter right on the subject. And I think that adds to the drama a little bit. Same with this photo right here. This is more on the subject. If it wasn't on the subject, the tank would just blend into the rest of the deck. Cool. Any other questions? No? Well, if Facebook is still going and still working, thanks for joining. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. But thanks, guys, for watching. And I'm going to end the Facebook live stream.